go. If you're not comfortable being recorded, please do not turn on your webcam so that you are not seen within the recording, please, and thank you. All right, so a little tiny bit about me. My name is Sudie Whalen. I'm with CalPro. I'm the Deputy Director of CalPro. For those of you who do know me, I am a CTE teacher at heart and by trade, and I absolutely love all things CTE. I also am a co-facilitator of our IET implementation clinic with CalPro. And if you are familiar with any of my other work, I'm also the Director of Online Learning for the Links National Project. So you might have seen me in a lot of different places, but today I'm wearing my CTE hat. For those of us who are really familiar with CTE, sometimes it's hard for us to see beyond our CTE standards and requirements. And when we're working in IET programs, or you're just trying to contextualize any of your content, then that means we have to figure out how to meet other standards. And in CTE, we know that some of the main areas that our students struggle with are in regard to meeting math and reading requirements and those industry recognized certifications. And so when we align standards for programs like IET, vocational ESL, vocational ABE, or any other kind of contextualized course and integrated course, it really helps us support students better so that they can pass industry certification exams and that they can do well. If you have not already downloaded the handouts, let me post those in the chat one more time. Just real quickly, if you could give me a quick thumbs up or a hand raise if you already got the handouts downloaded, if you have those with you. I just want to make sure everybody has those because I don't want you to not have access to this content. Okay, I see quite a few of you downloaded those already. Great, awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. You can also, if you didn't download them yet, go ahead and grab your cell phone, take a quick scan of that QR code, and you can download them, access them that way. Or if you just want to have them on your phone, on your Google Drive or something of that nature. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. We have people from across the state. That's always fun. So let's continue. So I'm hoping that by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to identify methods in which you can align CTE standards to the CCRS and the ELPS. And when I say CCRS, I'm talking about the College and Career Readiness Standards. When I'm talking about ELPS, I'm talking about the English Language Proficiency Standards. And when I say CTE, I'm talking about Career Technical Education. I know adult ed, we have a lot of acronyms and we turn a little bit into alphabet soup. So if I say anything and you're not sure what acronym I'm referring to, please feel free to ask. You are welcome to unmute and ask a question, raise your hand, or you can add a question to the chat. But if I say anything or you're not clear what I was referring to, please feel free to ask me and I'll be happy to share what that means. After that, I want to hopefully help that you'll be able to identify alignment between the CTE standards, the CCRS, and the ELPS lesson objectives. And then lastly, we hope you'll be able to effectively write a combined lesson objective, and you'll see some examples of that. Again, if you have any questions as we're going through here, I am a conversational, discussion, and collaborative person, so I really welcome you to unmute and speak and jump into the conversation if you have questions or need clarification. I also am aware that I talk kind of fast, so if you feel like I'm going a little bit too fast for you, please let me know. I will gladly slow down. So let's jump into why we're here, aligning standards. So when we're thinking about the different types of standards for career technical education, we have our CTE model curriculum standards by the California Department of Ed, and I'm going to demonstrate those and show you where you can access those later. If you downloaded those handouts, on the last page of the slides handout, it has links to all the things, to the different standards that we're going to be talking about today. So you do have access to those links if you downloaded the handouts or if you went to that Google Drive folder. So CTE, we have the CDE model curriculum standards, but we also have our industry standards. And as CTE teachers, we know those industry standards are what are typically assessed in those industry recognized certifications. The CDE model curriculum standards are awesome because they align to those industry recognized standards, and they also align to other standards like the CCRS and the ELPS. So when we think about more people joining. So when we think about basic skills standards, we're talking about specifically the college and career readiness standards for adult education. Those are K through 12 Common Core state standards aligned. A lot of you know that already because it's in your textbooks and things of that nature. Then they also connect to the English language proficiency standards. So what I'm going to do first in this presentation is walk you through how they connect. And then I'm going to actually show you what these standards look like. And then after that, I'm going to take it a step forward and show you what that looks like to integrate into a lesson so you can actually see an example of that. And all of the things that I'm showing you today, you have access to through those handouts I shared with you, including sample lessons and how other people have done these things besides just me, because I am not the be all and end all of knowledge. Although I think I'm pretty smart, I don't know everything, although I have been accused of being a know-it-all from time to time. So getting into more joining. Share the link to handouts again. Sure, of course I can. There you go. Thank you for asking. So when we first think about alignment and standards, some of the things that come up quite a bit are, how does this connect to CASAS? Because that's what we use to assess, right? And so I want to first talk about what CASAS says about the standards alignment. So if you go on the CASAS website, and if you downloaded my slides, you have the link to this on the slides. This shows you how CASAS connects to the CCRS. And then in a second, I'm going to show you how the CCRS connects to literally all the other standards we're going to be talking about. So if you're concerned or confused or just have questions about how CASAS connects to CCRS and what those things have in common, this chart is a really great at a glance list that shows you that. So for example, if I'm thinking about my beginning literacy ESL students at the CASAS levels, that's 180 and below, we know that for the CCR adult ed grade level will be kindergarten. Therefore, and the levels A through E that we see in the standards, that's level A, right? And so we're going to look really closely at this later. This all seems kind of hypothetical right now. So we're going to look at the theoretical, but we're going to look even closer in a moment when we're looking directly at the standards. But so we do have access to this. This is something that is a great starting point if you're just starting to look at, how do I connect to my CTE colleagues, especially if you're in an IET program and you're team teaching with an ESL student teacher with a CTE teacher, you're going to want to know, how can I connect these two things together? And if you're using the CASAS assessment, that is a really great place to start looking at this chart to see, where are my students at? Where should my students be in terms of their CCRS levels, and what levels should I be looking at? Now, I do want to say, because I'm kind of a standards nerd and a geek, that when we're looking at standards and things like that, just because my student assesses at 180 or below and they fall into level A, doesn't mean you don't want to look a little bit further along for them. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that right here. So if I'm looking at the standards, this is a snapshot from Anchor Standard 1 from the CCRS. And again, we're going to look directly at the standards in a moment. We see that level A, which is the same level we were just looking at just a moment ago when we were talking about our student that is here at the beginning ESL literacy level. If they're in level A and I'm assessing them at level A, I do also want to see what they can do in level B. Remember, we want to try to be rigorous, and we want to try to push our students up to the next level, especially if we're thinking about depth of knowledge. And so we're going to start finding out, can they ask and answer key questions about details in a text? But I might also want to see, can they also answer the who, what, when, where's, those W questions? And so that gives us an opportunity to see how far our students can stretch, right? And so again, if I'm looking at that chart and I'm seeing that my student is at a level B, then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to look at level B and then see what they can do in level C, because we want to see what exceeding the mastery goal looks like, right? And so that's how the CCRS kind of connect to our CCRS connect to CASAS. Looking at that chart, it really breaks it down for you. It makes it very clear what our students are in terms of CCRS levels if we're looking at CASAS. So now we saw kind of how CASAS can connect to CCRS. Now let's take it a step further and look at how CCRS connects to the English Language Proficiency Standards, the ELPS. So we just said that the CCRS level, Anchor 1 here that we're looking at, which is, looking really closely and being able to ask and answer key questions about details in text and et cetera. We notice across the bottom, we're identifying those level specific standards, A, B, C, D, and E. We have the anchor standard. That's the part that's up top. Those anchor standards are pretty consistent. Those anchor standards are what you're going to find within the English language proficiency standards. So let's take a look at those. And let me go ahead and post the handouts back in the chat just for anybody else who just joined. So now I'm looking at that. I can see my bubble's a little further down than it should be. But at the bottom of this ELPS and looking at this view, I can see the CCR anchors listed here. That tells me that if my students, or if I'm trying to guide my students to meeting these English language proficiency standards, if I'm looking at this specific standard, for example, this standard connects to CCR anchor 1, 2, 3, 7, and then also in 1, speaking and listening, anchor 2. Don't worry, Daniel, I'm going to give you a bigger demo. Remember, this is the theoretical part, and then we're going to go in and actually look at the standards, and you'll see it much larger in a moment. So just hang tight with me. I'm just trying to show you how the things connect. So if we're looking at, again, the CCR, the anchor is at the top listed. Going to the English language proficiency standards, you'll see what standards that connects to listed at the bottom, depending on which view you're looking at. There's actually 2 views of the English language proficiency standards. One view has a CCRS standard listed at the bottom of it. That's if that view is typically used by ESL teachers or teachers who are working with English language learners, because they focus more on the language acquisition piece than the CCRS. View 2, however, has that kind of flip the other way around, where the CCRS standard is listed at the top and the English language support is at the bottom. That view is used more for ABE teachers or teachers like me who are going to be leaning more heavily on the CCRS, but do need to make sure we're providing that language lift that the English language proficiency standards provide. So that's how the CCRS and the ELPS connect. Again, they're explicitly stated what standards they connect to in terms of those anchors. Now let's take it a step further. Let's see how this connects to CTE model curriculum standards. So if I'm looking at the CCRS, at the end of every CCRS standard, and again, we're going to look way closer at this in a moment. This is a theoretical piece, and we're going to look at this practically in a moment. At the end of each one of these standards, there is a code. This code specifically that we see here tells you more information about the standard itself. What it tells you is that this standard connects to a specific grade level and a specific strand of the Common Core state standards and what it connects to. In this case, if we're looking at that standard, RST 9-10.1 tells you that this is a reading standard for grades 9 through 10, and it connects to Anchor Standard 1. Again, this is all connecting together, and we're looking at the little code at the very end. Each one of these CCRS standards will tell you, is it reading, is it listening, is it speaking, etc., what grade level it is, and what standard number. So that's what that little code means. So those of you who've been using the CCRS for a while may have already known that, or you just kind of ignored it because it didn't mean that much to you. If you're trying to connect to the CTE model curriculum standards, that code really matters. I'm going to show you why in just one second. So you have this standard code here, aligns to reading standard, grade level 9 through 10, standard number 1. Now I want to go back before I fold in the CTE so we can bring this all back together. So remember when we were looking at this earlier, we started at the CASAS level and we said, okay, we're at CASAS. I'm looking to see what grade level they're at. Now, if I'm looking for grade level 9 through 10, that means my student on the CASAS is scoring between a 236 and a 245 according to this chart. Therefore, I should be looking at the CCRS level E. And so if I'm moving forward looking at the same standard, we see that grade level 9 through 10 is included at level E. And so now we can figure out, okay, how does that connect to my CTE model curriculum standard? So if I'm looking at the CTE model curriculum standards, which I'm going to show you those two again in a moment, what we see here is that we have the level listed the same exact way as how we see it listed on the CCRS. See that code there, RST 9-10.1. Again, that reading standard, grade level 9 through 10, standard number 1. If I'm looking at my CTE standards, I see that same code listed here. I also see that it can be applied to grade levels 11 through 12.4. Now, you don't see mostly anything in the CCRS relating to grade levels 11 through 12.4. Part of the reason for that is because our adult ed students typically don't fall into that category, and it just wasn't included in the standards when they developed them. Now, there are different ways that we can look at the CTE standards. There's the standard alignment chart, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then there's also standard alignment using the industry standards. And those are also broken down specifically by industry pathway, which are really helpful. As a CTE teacher that worked in the field and is familiar with my industry and I know what my standards require, it was really cool kind of seeing those folded into something that I could apply the academic skills also and figure out what they were. So in this case, we also see that we're talking about reading standards and interpretation and things of that nature. This one is determining meaning of symbols and keywords. If I'm looking at the industry standard itself, it's also talking about interpreting welding blueprints, gathering design, that same symbol and keywords kind of concept. So it very much aligns. So this all feels really hypothetical and theoretical. So let's look a little bit more at the standard. So let me go to my browser. I'm going to have to move you all to a different screen so that I can see my other window. Okay, so you guys are already here. I don't need that. So this is that CASAS chart I was showing you. I'm going to go ahead and pop this into the chat so you have easy access to it. So if I'm looking at this chart and I'm trying to identify where are my students, I'm going to be looking really closely if I'm an ESL or an ABE teacher at where I am in this reading scale range chart. And let me make this a little bit bigger so you all can see it a little better. And so if I'm looking at this, I'm trying to figure out where are they assessing, what are their test scores, to identify what level I should be looking at in terms of the CCRS. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions about this chart before I move into the CCRS? And feel free to unmute if you would like to speak.
Where is this chart?
I just popped a link into the chat.
Other than in your documents, is it published somewhere?
The link I put in the chat is to the CASAS.org website.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Alrighty, so let me come out of full screen and let's move into our college and career readiness standards. So has anybody not seen these standards before and doesn't understand how these are organized? Does anybody need kind of an overview of the standards themselves? No? Okay. All right. So if I'm looking at the CCRS, I'm going to go back to that anchor standard 1 that I was looking at a few moments ago. Here we are here, and I can make that a little bigger for you if my mouse will cooperate. There we go. So if I'm looking at this standard, I was looking at the other one a moment ago, and we identified that my student was probably at about a level A. And so that was where I find this here. But if I'm wanting to go into more the CTE alignment, most CTE students, we hope, are at a 9th or 10th grade reading level. So we're trying to hopefully have them in level E. Now, we know sometimes our IET students are more in the intermediate level, right? And so they might be in level D, and we might need to work with them to get them up to level E. And that's why when we're doing IET, it's important to have that extra language support so that students can have that extra language lift that they may need. And so if I'm looking here at my standard, I see our CCR anchor listed. I see where the code is listed down here that tells me what I can look for in my CTE standards that aligns to that. The difficulty with the CTE standards, if I'm using the standard alignment chart, it's really easy to see where those connect. If I'm not using the standard alignment chart and I'm explicitly using, oh, hold on one second, let me admit this person. And if I'm explicitly using just my CTE standards or the industry specific standards, I have to go beyond just looking at that code. I need to look at what it's actually asking me to do or asking my students to do, and then go look through the standards to locate the alignment and identify where that matchup is. So that is a little bit more work, but it also gets you closer to right when it comes to what the students actually have to be able to do on those industry certification. The standard alignment chart is great, but it's really basic things. When you want to dive deeper into the specific welding, construction, accounting, finance, and those kind of things, skills that students need to have, you need to be able to really look closely and articulate how these things connect to one another. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So now we see that this is where the the CCRS standard, where we see that code here. Now I want us to go a step further and look at how does my CCRS connect to my ELPS. So if I'm looking at the ELPS, remember I told you there are 2 different views in the ELPS. I'm going to look at view 1 because most likely I'm trying to see, where this connects to my ESL teacher. If I'm a CTE student, I can't talk. As a CTE teacher, I'm probably going to want to work with my ESL teacher, both of us looking at view 1, because the ESL teacher is primarily going to be focusing on view 1 because it's more heavily specific to the ESL content and the ELL learning content. So looking here, if I'm looking at, for example, standard 1 here, and let me make this bigger for you, and let me know if you can't see. At the bottom of the standards, I can see where the CCRS are listed. And so I can look for those specific anchor standards as to how they connect. So that alignment between CCRS and ELPS is pretty clear. I'm sorry, not alignment, correspondence between CCRS and ELPS is pretty clear. These two they're not directly aligned, but they do correspond to each other. And so I can know if I'm looking at anchor standard 7 in the CCRS, this does connect to standard 1. If I want to go down to standard 2, this connects connects more to math practice standards that we see within the CCRS, or I can also fold that into science and things of that nature. So let's look at the more complex part of this, connecting to the CTE standards specifically. Before I continue, any questions? Okay, I'm going to assume everyone understands. Alrighty, so getting into our CTE model curriculum standards, I really love these. I think this is a really great thing that CTE provides for us as CTE teachers, trying to articulate what we know our students need to have for those industry recognized certifications, while also trying to make sure they have those academic skills that they need, that they can pass the reading and writing portions of the exams and things like that. Having these model curriculum standards to directly connect to that content along with what I need them to know as a CTE teacher is super helpful. So if you haven't looked at these, please take the time to do so. I'm going to go ahead and pop this link into the chat too, although it is on the slides, so you can play with that a little bit more. And so within this, there's multiple sets of standards in here. What the standards alignment chart I was referring to earlier is listed in this first link where it says CTE standards introduction. And so if I open this up, and I believe it's on page 6, can you tell I've been in here a few times? I might have looked at this a time or two. So going down, keep going. Okay, it's not on page 6, I lied. There it is. So let me maximize this so you can see a little bit better. Alrighty, so looking at this, this tells me really quickly which standards these basic standard alignments connect to. These are really easy ways if you're just getting into aligning your CTE standards with your CCRS or ELPS, and you're just getting into, you know, trying to align curriculum and things like that. This is an awesome place to start because you have the academics piece, you have communication, and all you need to do is look at this code here and then cross-reference it within your CCRS. And you can do that very easily with a quick control find, and I'll show you how that works, and that's Control F on your keyboard. So if I just copy this and close this out, I'm going to go back to my CCRS, and I'm going to just do a quick, I want to find out where this is. Oh, now it's not finding it for me. Why do you not know how to search today? Okay, this worked the last time I did it, I promise. Oh, it's not finding anything. Okay, now you can. Okay, RST. Oh, now it works. Okay, that's nice. All right, so if I'm going looking for the standard, I can look at RST 9.9. Why does it? I'm sorry. How embarrassing. Oh, they have a period here. That's what it is. RST 0.9. I don't know why it's not searching. Is this just me? Thank you, Carol. I don't know if I just completely blind to this. This worked really well when I did this in another session, and now today it's like, it's not going to work as well today, Sudie. So I don't know why it's not searching. Maybe it's just me. Oh, there's no space. That's my problem. Thank you. So if I'm doing RST9, if I'm just trying to look for it, just do a quick control search. You just now learned through my trial and error that if you're looking for something specifically here, don't do a direct copy and paste because there's no space in the one that's on the CCRS. But you want to look for, thank you, Serena. So you want to look for and try to figure out where do these connect when you're in here, right? And so this is a really quick way to do that. Just type it in SLS 9-10 or whichever standard you're looking for. So let's see if we can find anything with writing in here. So I'm going to go into my CCRS and I'm going to look for WR. And if I'm looking for WR, what code did I want? WR, I thought I swore I saw that. Oh, it's WS11. So I'm looking for WS11. Nothing there. What about WS9? Nope. WS10? Nope. So that's pretty much going to tell me that that doesn't connect. But if I go further down and I'm looking past the reading standards into my writing standards, and this is where it's like there's not as many standards to choose from, if we're being really honest, in terms of connecting to the model curriculum standard alignment chart versus actually looking for the alignment through reading the standards themselves. You will be able to find some, but there's just not as many. And so for me as a CTE teacher, while that was really helpful to get us going within our, we started looking at these within our PLC team to identify, where can we get started? What kind of alignment do we already have? Especially since our professional learning community, we're all singleton teams. And so we really needed, to find some way to connect just amongst ourselves, much less getting into integrating the CCRS into our practice. And so starting with the standards alignment chart was really helpful for us to find alignment amongst ourselves before we started looking at the CCRS. And so looking at this, you have, your health and safety, responsibilities, ethics, all that great stuff, right? And so these are really great places to start. But again, if you really want to dive deeply into supporting students, you really have to get further into those industry alignment standards and then looking at how those align and being really intentional. So let's look at manufacturing and product development. So I'm going to show you kind of how we have to be a little creative with doing these things. But if you're intentional about it, it's not the end of the world. So if we're looking at these standards, this again is manufacturing. It says a career-ready individual readily can access and use knowledge and skills through all these different things. They can communicate, they can develop, they can do all this great stuff. And we have all these different things mentioned in here, but then we get down deep into the nitty gritty, and there's academic standards, there's communication standards, there's career planning and management standards. There's so many standards that you can use and choose from. So if you're in an IET program and you're saying, I don't know how I can possibly have anything in common with my ESL teacher or my ABE teacher, they are using the CCRS, they're using the ELPS, we have nothing in common. That's not wholly true. If you start looking at some of these different communication standards, recognizing the elements of communication, identifying barriers, things of that nature, identifying interest, and then you just keep going. Technology standards, how important is digital literacy? What we found out in 2020 and 2021, that it's huge, right? Thank you, Caroline. I hope I said your name correctly. So that's huge, right? And so you want to be able to make sure that they can meet all of these things. From a CTE perspective, this is really important. And so you get into those critical thinking and problem solving, health and safety, like we saw earlier. Thank you, Caroline. And then responsibility, flexibility, et cetera. There's a lot of different things that we can align to, but then you want to look really closely at how does this connect to the standards? So if we're looking at, let's go up a little bit, back up to communication. So looking at communication, notice the standard, demonstrate elements of written and electronic communication, such as accurate spelling, grammar, and format. Do you think that could connect to our college and career readiness standards or our English language proficiency standards? Right, it totally can, right? And so if we look at these, and we're really intentional, we can go beyond just looking at the standards alignment chart, which is really great for like just getting started, but diving deeper into how does this connect? And so one of the great ways of doing that is just looking for keywords and phrases from where this connects from here going into our CCRS. So we want to say accurate spelling. So I don't know which standard connects to spelling, so I'm going to look it up. And so look at that. CCR Anchor 2, spelling when writing, demonstrate command and convention of standard English capitalization, punctualization, spelling, and writing. Now I have a place I can start to try to connect my work to the CTE standards, or connect my students to these CTE standards. So now when I'm having this conversation with my co-teacher, or if I'm alternating teaching, my team teacher for IET, I can say, hey, my students really need to be able to demonstrate accurate spelling. And then they can say, oh, you know what? We actually have a standard assessment that we do for CCR Anchor 2 that connects with this, right? And then I can go ahead and take a look at how this connects. And then I can be intentional in planning my curriculum to make sure we're not only meeting the CCR anchor, but that we're also meeting the CTE standard. And then taking that a step further, looking at ESL, what if I want my students to be able to do things in spelling? I don't know. Are there ESL standards specific to spelling? Maybe not. Is there anything specific to grammar? And CTE, look at that. There is a little grammar. So apparently ELP standard 10, right, connects to that CCR anchor 1 that's specific to grammar, and anchor 3. But when we were looking at this a second ago, we were looking at anchor 2. So let me see which one connects to anchor 2. I'm not really sure. Oh, look at that. Standard number 9 connects to anchor 2. So there's going to be a couple of different ones that connect. And then as you're unpacking the standards and deep diving into that, you can decide which specific standard with your teammates that you really want to focus on explicitly and then move from there. Does this make sense? Does anybody have questions so far before we get into looking at how we apply this to lessons and objectives? Go ahead, Daniel.
I think I'm just technical. I can't even say the word. Technology decline, or I don't. You're going really fast, entering all these things, and you've kind of. It's over my head, but that's
okay.
Right.
So one of the ways, I'm glad you said that. So one of the things that I'm doing when I'm looking for things, I'm hitting Control plus F. I'm putting that into the chat. That's just the control button on your keyboard plus F. And I can do that to look for keywords. So as you're planning with either your IET team, or if you're in a professional learning community or things like that, if you want to go beyond looking at just that standard alignment chart, I can look at my CTE standards, look for the specific standards that we in IET have agreed. If we're doing an IET program, if we've agreed this is the specific skills we want students to have, which standards connect with that. And then I'm also going to look in the CCRS to see what standards connect. And so using those keywords, that control find feature, Control F, is really helpful for making the work a lot faster. You, of course, could print these out and just go through reading it and use the good old highlighter. I like highlighters, they're cool. I like to mark up books too, and just mark up where you want that to be. But if you're trying to just do this quickly, just to get oriented and figure out which standards even connect, a really great way to do that is just using that Control F feature. And Daniel, I know I'm going kind of fast. It's a lot of content to cover, but I'm also recording this session. So you're more than welcome to get a copy of that recording, have all of these handouts and all of these things so you can rewind it and move it forward and do it over and over again if you'd like. So anything you need, please feel free to email me. I am happy to help. Any other questions? I thought I heard somebody else unmute. Did anybody else have a question?
Sudi, if this isn't the right time for this question, please let me know. But I'm wondering, when we've done our CASAS testing, we will run TE reports to look at which standards are ones that our students are doing well on, or ones that we need to improve in the percentages. Are there any reports that are run for any standards outside of the CASAS competencies that are connected to the college and career readiness standards, or any of the CTE standards, or even the English language development standards?
I think that's definitely a CASAS question, and I'm a CalPro person, but I can tell you there are different, I know that there are a number of different reports that are not just from CASAS, but also from, NRS, and that's where CASAS, the National Reporting System, sorry, but and I know that's where CASAS pulls their data. I'm not really sure what other reports that you can look at for that, but I think that's a really good question for CASAS, and I'm actually kind of curious too. So I'm going to make a note to myself, and feel free to reach out to them to ask, but I also kind of want to know how that works. So that's a really good question. CASAS reports, and you mean reports just through CASAS or even outside of CASAS?
I mean, anything is fine, but what we usually do for at the end of each assessment window is we'll look at the standards and then do an action plan and analysis for reteach. But what we've been finding is that they're like, well, this is on the CASAS competencies. What about the the college and career readiness standards? What about these standards? And so even though it's incorporated, that like reteach and what to specifically look for when you're using the different search buttons and all that stuff, I just haven't found like hard student data that's correlated to the CASAS test.
Yeah,
so
I'm not
just wondering if you knew of any.
I'm not 100%. No, I mean, I do know of one other, but it's very specific. For example, CDCR, who's corrections, they have literally folded the CCRS into their accountability system. So when they do their progress reports for students, they can actually mark, what standards the students have met, and they can run those reports. But that's a closed system specifically for corrections. I'm not really sure how that works with CASAS or if there's other data access out there. But I have made a note on my wonderful pink sticky that just disappeared because of my virtual background, but I will ask that question because I think that is a really, really good question. And Margaret had a request in the chat. If you don't mind, Serena, just repeating what your question was in the chat, because I guess some people weren't really sure. But what she was asking for was Are there other reports that display what standards are being met, and how do you know when your students are meeting those standards, and what data is out there for us to look at that? So I'll definitely check and hopefully be able to get back with you, because I think that's a really good question. Thank you. Any other questions before we move into integrating lessons and talking about how this works? Go ahead.
Hi, Sudhi. I have a quick
Hi.
question. But by the way, this is wonderful. It's such a productive thing to do. Thank you so much. I was wondering, you mentioned the industry recognized certificates. Can you tell us where to get that?
Where to get the certificates?
Yeah. No, the industry recognized standard.
So it really varies
Like
by industry. So there, again, it really does vary. That you can do a quick Google search, just find out what are the welding requirements for certification. What are the requirements for certification for, if we're talking accounting and things like that. But if you're working within an IET program, for example, or if you have CTE teachers on staff, that is your best resource to ask, because they will have gone through that certification process. They know what that is, and et cetera. So it really varies by industry. One of the really cool things that I like about this, the model curriculum standards here, is that they really connect to industry. And so it really covers anything that would be on that certification test. And Lorraine said, I think when the new CASAS tests are released, the new test is correlated to the ELPS. The test results in TE will match more meaningfully. Thank you, Lorraine. I appreciate you sharing that. Serena says, are there any, oh, thank you, you added the question in there. So Molly, my suggestion to you would be just do a quick Google, California, depending on your industry, and you want to always start with California, because industry standards do vary by state. So if you're trying to find out, if you're trying to get into masonry, for example, you would put California Masonry Industry Certification, and then it'll give you the information about what the requirements are, who the certifying agency is, etc. So there's a lot of different ones. And then
I thought you may have referenced the document and I missed it, but thank you.
Oh, no, I didn't. No worries, no worries. And so as we're moving forward, any other questions? Because I want to make sure I cover any other questions you have before we start talking about aligning objectives or aligning lessons. Any other questions? And thank you those who've already asked questions. Thank you, Margaret. It's always great having CASAS people on the call. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to our presentation, and then we're going to move further into aligning outcomes. Once we've looked at how these standards connect to each other, and we've now identified that the CCRS connect to the ELPS, and the CCRS also connect to the CTE standards, so we can work from there, and then also connecting that to CASAS, because that's the assessments we're using, especially in ESL and ABE. So let's talk more about aligning outcomes. So it's really important when we're aligning outcomes to identify what the CTE learning outcome is, what the basic skills outcome is. So what's the ABE expected outcome? What are the ESL expected outcomes? And then also analyze how those outcomes relate to each other. What skills are my students expected to know? Do they have to perform? Do they have to explicitly or implicitly know through strategies that relate to the standards, right? And so you want to make sure that we're doing this to adequately prepare our students. This isn't just busy work. This is things that we do because we know it'll help our students get into those jobs and earn a sustainable wage, right? And then we want to revise language in the standard to demonstrate the contextualization. You're probably like, Sudhi, why would I revise language in a standard? That's crazy. Because it'll make more sense to you, and then it'll make more sense to your student. So let's take a look at some examples. And this is coming directly from, oh, I have more people waiting to come in. Sorry about that. So this is coming directly from the welding model curriculum standards. And then I'm looking at the CCRS and the ELPS specifically. So if I'm looking at this, my first one, interpret welding blueprints, gather design and materials information, perform calculations, and use detail to plan, layout, and produce parts or finished products. So when we looked at the CCRS, what we found, did I miss something in the chat? Oh, you guys are talking to each other. So when we looked at the CCRS, what we found aligned to that was the Math Standard 5, Level 1. Convert among different size standard measurements using within a given measurement system and use those conversions in solving multi-step real-world problems. Those two things they don't have the exact same words, they're not the exact same thing, but we know they connect to each other. So those two things I could put together to revise this and put into student-friendly language to tell them exactly what it is that we expect them to do. Let's look at another example. Analyze welding symbols on drawings, things of that nature. The CCR says we can determine the meaning of symbols, keywords, and phrases, but then we also have ELP standard 8 that also connects to this. So this one, I can connect to both my CCRS and my ELPS. And then if I'm looking at the welding, the third welding outcome, employ and explain the steps that things are taking. Again, this can connect to my CCRS or my ELPS, explain events, procedures, and ideas, concepts in historical, scientific, or technical text, etc. So if I'm looking at the specific outcomes, again, I had to be intentional and say, what are the things that are really important and how can I connect to that? And from there, I can then connect it to my CCRS. And then after looking at my CCRS, I can identify what the English language proficiency standard is that connects to that English standard in case I need to provide the language lift to my students. And again, it's not only ESL teachers who use the English language proficiency standards. A lot of us, myself included, have had English language learners in our classes, even though we don't teach ESL. And so it is helpful to know how it connects and to be able to provide that additional language lift when we can. But the really cool thing about integrated education training, or IET or IELCE, that integrated English language civics education, is that it allows us to provide that ESL structured language lift while also providing that CTE. And in some programs, they're also doing that basic education piece, like the math we saw in that first one, while also connecting to CTE. And I've even seen some programs do ESL math, which is also very cool. For me, when I was in the classroom as a CTE teacher, I was also teaching business math. So we were trying to fill that gap where students had those math requirements and we're kind of struggling with that. So I'm going to take us a little bit further and start looking at aligning lessons, objectives, and outcomes, and show you some samples of what that looks like. Again, this is in the handout packet, and so I'm going to put that in here for you again. And then I also need to locate those links because I know a couple of people joined us a little late, so I want to make sure everybody has the handouts, because you can look at this on my screen, but it might be easier to look at on yours. So if you don't have those handouts open, go ahead and do so, because we're going to look at some sample lessons and then look at some other things and how this connects to actual lesson planning. Okay, so going back to my browser. So this, let me make this bigger. Okay, if you open this, this is actually an excerpt from a document. You can actually click it and see the whole entire thing. It's a really great guide to developing basic skill curriculum for IET. It has a lot of cool samples and just things that you can use. So if you're looking at this handout, don't only use just what I've given you, but you might want to also take a look at the links that are included in there, because there's more information if you like to read things. So this is a tool that they include in there that allows you to identify basic skills. Let's look at one that's already filled in. So you can kind of see what that looks like. So in this case, I'm looking at occupational skills training. That's our CTE piece. And then they were doing this with adult basic ed with ABE. And so they were looking at, learning names and functions of various tools to begin with. And we noticed that ABE was going through and making sure that they had, the math requirement, the reading, some writing. And then they also included OSHA, which is that workforce prep piece in here. And then when we looked at their second unit, they did this a similar alignment. Now notice when we're looking at this, the math lesson up front was looking at, on the first week, was looking at units of measurement, basic fractions, which would prepare the student for the following week. This is a really great example, but the thing that I struggled with as I was looking at this is I don't know what standards this connects to. So I don't know what standards my students would be able to meet. So if I was actually using this tool, I would take it a step further and actually identify what specific standards these connected to so that I could articulate that to my students. And so that if I'm an IET team teacher, my ESL teacher or my ABE teacher knows what these standards are, and we've agreed on what we want them to meet. So while this is a really cool tool, I would take it a step further and add some standard alignment in there to make it a little bit clearer what exactly it is I want my students to be able to do. So let's look at what that looks like when we're intentional with doing that. And that's not to say the other tool wasn't a good tool. It is a really good tool. But to me, I've told you all, I'm a standards nerd and geek. I really love standards. So identifying what that standard alignment is really helpful for me. So in this case, I have a sample lesson plan that's also in your handouts there. In this case, we're looking at a manufacturing lesson. We're looking at tolerance, infractions and things of that nature. Notice I included my CCRS competency along with those CTE standards and competencies here, right? So asking and answering key details in the text, describing the connection between two ideas, understanding fractions, explaining equivalence, and then I'm connecting that to those CTE pieces by being able to produce quality products, diagnose production problems, things of that nature. So I've been very intentional with identifying those basic skills that we're developing, identifying what kind of content support I might need, and also looking at what CCRS standards I'm looking at here that connect to this. Now, if I wanted to really be even more intentional, I could take that a step further and connect it to the English language proficiency standards by articulating what anchor standards these are and then matching it up to the ELPS. And then I could also keep going further, and then we can start making our integrated lesson. In this case, we're looking at the career and employability skills. Remember those soft skills, those skills that matter. Here we said it's managing time, problem solving, communicating verbally, organizing, using math strategies, that kind of thing. We're identifying what tools and things that we need, and then a full lesson explaining how we plan to teach this in an integrated way, and even a way to extend learning. So I don't have time to go through this whole lesson with you, but I wanted to make sure that you had this sample in here so that you could see what does that look like if I'm intentionally trying to integrate a lesson between CTE and basic skills or ESL. Let's go a little bit farther and keep going and look at some more. Now, what if I'm trying to identify my specific outcomes, right? If I'm saying my CTE versus my English language acquisition outcomes, right? So in this example, I wanted to be able to identify the best health and safety practices in the workplace and understand the specific principles of, and in this case, you could identify specific principles of welding, specific principles of accounting, specific principles of, being an LPN, things of that nature. And then in ESL, in my English language acquisition side, I want to be able to demonstrate those basic oral and written communication skills, as well as know how to read and calculate measurements, right? So that when me and my team would work together to put those things together. So let's look a little bit deeper at what that looks like. So here I'm looking at some specific standards. In this case, I went with, earlier I did CCRS. So for this example, I decided to go ELPS. So I can kind of balance things out a little bit. I don't want to look like I'm paying favorites. Lorraine said, where can I find the basic skills verbiage? The basic skills verbiage typically comes from the CCRS or your ELPS. It depends on what you're focusing on. But when you're working with your teacher, and that's a really good question, I'm glad you asked. When you're working with the teacher, whether you're ESL, ABE, or CTE, you want to come together to identify what standards specifically you want to meet. But then you also want to figure out what are the skills within that standards I want the student to have, and how am I going to phrase that in a way the student understands it. And so sometimes we're going to, we might pull directly from the standard itself, but most of the time I'm going to put that in simple terms that my students can understand, because this information isn't just for me and my planning partner, my co-teacher, or my team teacher. This is also information I need to be able to share with my students so that they understand. So looking at this example, on item 1, I said I want my students in CTE to be able to understand the procedural steps related to giving a client a bed bath, right? So then looking at the ESL side of that, my ESL teacher says, well, I want my students to be able to participate in level appropriate oral exchange of information and ideas and be able to respond to the audiences. So then we get together and we talk about it, and then we decide, okay, putting these two things together, our students will be able to participate in level appropriate discussion of the process of giving the client a bed bath and respond to audience comments and questions. Now, depending on the level of ESL my student is at, if they're an advanced ESL student, I could give this to them. They should be able to follow it. If they're intermediate, I might need to use different words to make sure my student understands it. So I might put that in even simpler terms, because again, we want to make sure our students understand what those objectives are too. And then I go a little step further together and I think about, okay, how can we teach this? Now, this isn't a complete lesson plan. This is just a quick synopsis of what we could do. So in this case, we said students can read chapters on steps to giving a bath in the textbook for homework. The ESL teacher can review the steps, read the text orally in the class. Then the students can work in pairs to sequence the steps of the bed bath by using cutouts to reinforce content and procedure. Practice sequencing language, first, second, third, etc., and then respond orally to one another. Now, that's not a full lesson plan. That's just a description of an activity, right? But we have to identify, what are the specific words? What exactly are the steps? And we would flesh this out a lot more so that we have a further example like what we have here, the full lesson. This is what the full lesson looks like. But if we're just planning this as teachers together, we're going to start right here. Thank you so much, Vicki. I appreciate that. And then if we go, let's look at the second example we have here. Students will make a V block. That's for machine technology. So that's what the CTE teacher wants them to be able to do. Our ESL teacher wants the student to be able to deliver short oral presentations. So now the two of us need to come together and decide, what will we do with those things together, right? And so then our combined objective becomes students will be able to describe at least first steps in the process of making a V block in a short presentation. So see, I, CTE, and ESL, we both get what we want. What do we have going on in the chat? Since the caveat is level appropriate, you would need to determine the level of the ESL student before planning activities in detail. Yes, ma'am. And that's kind of why I started with looking at CASAS to figure out where are my students and then identifying what standards we want them to meet. And then also identifying, is that student prepared to go into an integrated class? And so when we think about IET, for example, we don't necessarily anticipate we're going to have a lot of beginning ESL students in IET because IET is supposed to be an accelerated model, right? And if they have to run the full gamut of English language acquisition, that they can't do that in an accelerated model and do CTE. So we might want them to be a little further along. That's not to say that beginning ESL students can't be in an integrated class. However, you have vocational ESL, vocational ABE, and things like that. Yes, Karen, this does lead to the single set of learning objectives for IELC and IET. You're very astute. Appreciate that. So then moving forward, after we've identified the combined objective that my team teacher and I both want our student to have, then we next move into a plan to teach. How do we want to teach this combined objective and what's this teaching strategy? Again, it's not a lesson plan, it's just the plan of how we want to teach it. And so in this case, we said students will listen to a lecture from the CTE teacher, me, about how to make a V block. Students will participate in hands-on practice in making a V block. The ESL teacher will introduce steps of how to make a short presentation and distribute instructions and a template. Instructions include that the students will take pictures or videos as they make the V block. Students will write a description for each picture. Students will practice delivering their presentation orally. When peers use the pictures to guide them, students will make a presentation on how to make a V block to the whole class. What I really like about this example is, one, it's really great for various learning styles, whether you're a visual, auditory, or a kinesthetic learner, right? And then it also reinforces speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So you're getting all of those ESL aspects in there too. And we're doing the CTE stuff at the same time. So everybody's happy. So that's kind of what this looks like when we're doing this in practice. And so if we wanted to, dive a little bit deeper and do this even more, I would say, get together with your CTE or ESL or ABE teacher, the one who is not what you do, and then practice just writing down specific skills that you think that students should have. They write down the specific skill, look to see what standard that connects to, and then combine that into one objective. Then start thinking about how you could teach it. When you start doing this just as a practice before there's any stakes in the game, it does make it a little bit easier. You get better at doing it. And then when it's time to really do this, you're more prepared to actually start writing single sets of learning objectives and integrated lessons and things of that nature. Before I go into the wrap up, does anybody have additional questions? Not one? All righty. Okay, well, so you all had the handouts and the documents. I hope you all have my email address. I'm hoping that through this presentation, you were able to kind of understand and identify, was there a question here? Oh, I lost my chat. There it goes. Oh, thank you both. Thank you so much. Okay, so what I'm hoping that you'll be able to identify methods that we use to align our CTE standards to CCRS and ELPS. I will happily put that in the chat in one moment. Thank you. And then we're also going to, well, I'm hoping that you're able to identify alignment between all of these things and the correspondences. And then hopefully you can at least be getting started on writing lesson objectives. Feel free to take those samples I gave you, use those, practice with them. And if you have questions in between time or as you're doing this, if you run into any sticky points or you just need a little help, feel free to email me. I am happy to answer questions about IET, about standards integration, primarily just because I love this stuff and I find it fun. So if you have any questions or you need anything, please feel free to email me. I am recording this. I will post a link to the recording into the chat that you saw on the main page here. So please, on the conference main page for this session. So if you need anything, again, feel free to email me and let me know. We have 5 minutes remaining, so I'll hang out for a few minutes if anybody has questions or just wants to chat. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for the compliments and your kind words in the chat. I really appreciate it. Have a beautiful rest of the day and a fabulous weekend. And if you need anything or have questions and want to chat some more, just stick around. I'm not going anywhere for another 4 minutes. Thank you all.